That man has my granddaughter. She said it once, just once, and her voice didn't break it cut. An old woman, 71 years old, walking straight through a crowded diner like the floor was on fire past every able-bodied man who looked away until her fingers locked around the arm of the one man nobody else would dare touch. Before you hear what happened next, if this is your first time here, hit subscribe and drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what those 600 bikers did next, nobody saw coming. The breakfast rush at Della's roadside diner had been running the same way for 31 years. Honest truckers at the counter, retired couples by the window, the occasional family passing through on their way to somewhere more interesting than Harlan Creek, Montana. Coffee that was strong enough to strip paint eggs that came out exactly 2 minutes too late, and a jukebox in the corner that only played 3 songs because the 4th button had been broken since 2009. Nobody came to Della's for excitement. That morning, excitement came to them. It started with the sound of the door. Not a knock, not a bell. The door swung hard and fast the way doors swing when the person pushing it has run out of time for gentleness. And every head in the diner, 14 people, 2 waitresses, 1 cook, turned toward the sound. She was not what anyone expected. So she was small. The kind of small that years do to a person that gravity does, that loss does. White hair pulled back, wearing a floral blouse that was buttoned wrong one side higher than the other, like she'd dressed in the dark or in a hurry or both. Her hands were shaking. Not a little, a lot. The way hands shake when the body is trying to hold something together that the mind has already started to lose. Her name was Margaret Carter. Nobody in that diner knew that yet. And what they knew was that she was standing in the doorway, breathing hard, her eyes moving across every face in the room with a kind of desperate calculation, like someone sorting through cards, looking for the one that could save her. She passed over the trucker at the first stool, too slow. She passed over the young man near the window reading a newspaper, too distracted. She passed over the booth of retired men who'd been debating the weather and property taxes for the last 40 minutes. Her eyes stopped. In the back corner of the diner, taking up space the way certain people just naturally do, sat a man who looked like he'd been assembled from spare parts of a more dangerous world. 6'2", maybe more. Shoulders built for carrying things heavier than most people deal with. Arms completely covered in ink that told stories Margaret couldn't read but somehow still felt. His hair was blonde, sun-faded, pulled back with the casualness of someone who hadn't thought about it. He was eating alone, black coffee, eggs, toast he hadn't touched. His name was Colt Maddox, and every single person in that diner, in that subconscious animal way that humans sometimes know things before they can say them, had been giving him a wide, comfortable distance since he sat down. Margaret Carter walked straight toward him, and the diner went quiet. Not silent, the jukebox kept playing, the coffee machine kept hissing, but the human noise dropped. Conversations sputtered. Forks paused. People watch the way you watch something you know is about to matter, if you can't say why. She reached his table, and she grabbed his arm. Not tapped, not touched, grabbed. Both hands, fingers wrapped around the sleeve of his jacket, holding on like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Colt Maddox looked up from his plate. Most men grabbed unexpectedly by a stranger react with surprise. Some with irritation, some with alarm. Colt Maddox went still, completely instantly still. The kind of stillness that isn't the absence of reaction, it's the concentration of it. His eyes, which were pale and sharp and had seen enough in 43 years to know the difference between 1,000 different kinds of trouble, fixed on her face. And he saw it immediately, which did not fear. Not just fear, something worse. Something that sits underneath fear, that fear is built on top of desperation. The kind that a person only carries when they've already exhausted every safer option and arrived finally at the one they're most afraid of. That man has my granddaughter. Her voice was low, controlled. She wasn't screaming, wasn't hysterical. That was the thing that hit him hardest, how controlled she was, how much it was costing her. Colt set down his fork. "Say that again," he said, not unkind, steady. "Her name is Emily. She's 8 years old. Her mother's ex, Derek Pruitt, he came to my house this morning. Before I even knew what was happening, he had her in his truck and he was gone. Her grip tightened. There's a restraining order. He's already broken it once. The police, her voice caught finally just for a second. The nearest station is 40 minutes away. I called them. They said they're coming. But I know Derek. I know what he's like when he feels cornered. And every minute, what kind of truck? Colt asked. She blinked like she'd been expecting him to pull away, to make excuses, to be like everyone else. Gray, a gray pickup, older. He's got a dent on the passenger side rear quarter. I don't know the license plate. Which direction did he go? North, out of Harlan Creek, heading north. There's an old property his family has maybe 40 minutes out. He used to talk about it. I don't know if that's where he's going, but Colt was already reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a fold of bills, didn't count them, just set them on the table. He looked past Margaret toward the counter, where Della herself, 60 years old, and twice as tough, was standing with a coffee pot frozen in midair. You hear any of that? Colt asked her. Della nodded slowly. Call it in again. Tell them heading north, gray pickup dent in the rear quarter. Keep calling until someone picks up. Don't stop. He looked back at Margaret. His voice was still steady, not soft, not trying to soothe her, not offering her comfort she hadn't asked for. Just clear, practical, like someone who had decided something and was now simply moving through the decision. Come with me. Where? Outside. She let go of his sleeve, and for just a moment something passed across her face, not hope exactly. Not yet. More like the thing that exists in the space just before hope, when you've handed the weight to someone else and you don't know yet if they're strong enough to carry it, but God help you, you've got nothing left to carry it yourself. She followed him. The diner watched them go. Nobody said a word. Outside the diner, the morning was ordinary. Flat highway, mountains in the distance, doing what mountains do, staying there enormous and indifferent. A gas station across the road, a hardware store that opened at 9 and hadn't yet. And in the parking lot of Della's roadside diner, stretching further than Margaret had even registered when she'd driven in, were motorcycles. Not 3, not 10. Row after row after row, black chrome color-faded leather, saddlebags heavy with miles, helmets strapped to handlebars, the smell of oil and road dust, and something that wasn't quite dangerous, but was right next to it. She hadn't noticed them when she'd come in. She'd been running on adrenaline and terror and hadn't noticed anything except the door and the faces beyond it. She noticed them now. How many? She started. 600, said a voice to her left. She turned. A woman, 40s, red hair, forearms like she'd been working with them her whole life. She was already pulling on her riding gloves. We're coming from the rally in Great Falls. Overnight route, stop for fuel and food. She didn't look at Margaret when she said it. She was watching Colt. What's the situation? Child, Colt said. He was pulling out his phone. 8 years old, taken by a non-custodial male with a restraining order violation. Gray pickup heading north. Possible destination, old property 40 minutes north of here. Margaret. He looked at her. Can you give me the name, the family name on the property? Pruitt, she said, the Pruitt land. It used to be a cattle property, but they stopped working it years ago. There's a barn. He used to take Emily's mother there before all of it. Colt was already on his phone. 2 sentences, 3 words, a pause. Then he was talking to someone named Rex, and Rex was talking to someone else, and within 40 seconds, Margaret heard the sound begin. Engines. Not 1, not 10. And they started like a wave. The front row, then the second, then back and back and back across the parking lot until the sound wasn't separate anymore, until it was one continuous wall of sound that she felt in her chest, in her teeth, in the part of her that was still standing in her kitchen that morning, watching a gray pickup truck disappear with her 8-year-old granddaughter inside. The woman with the red hair stepped up beside her. You ride? She asked. Not in 40 years, Margaret said. The woman handed her a helmet. You do today. Inside the diner, the 14 customers and 2 waitresses and 1 cook were still not entirely sure what they just witnessed. Jerry Halverson, 62, retired schoolteacher, had been sitting at the window booth. He watched the parking lot empty in a way that didn't seem possible for how many motorcycles had been in it. He watched them form up not randomly, not chaotically, but in some kind of order he couldn't quite parse from where he was sitting. He watched the old woman in the floral blouse put on a helmet and climb onto the back of the biggest bike in the lot. He looked across the table at his wife, Norma. "Did you?" he started. "Yes," she said. "Should we?" "Della's already on the phone," Norma said. "She hasn't stopped calling." Jerry looked back at the window. The last motorcycle pulled out of the lot. The highway north swallowed them. He sat with his coffee going cold and thought about how many times he'd told his grandkids not to talk to strangers. How many times he'd meant it, believed it, built a rule around it. He thought about a 71-year-old woman who'd walked into a diner and gone straight past every familiar face to the one that scared her most. He thought maybe he'd been teaching the wrong thing. On the back of Colt Maddox's motorcycle, Margaret Carter held on. She hadn't been on a motorcycle since 1983, since a summer that felt like it belonged to someone else. Her hands found the grip bars behind her, then in a decision she made without fully knowing, she moved them to Colt's sides instead. More solid, more real. He didn't flinch at that. "How long were you inside before you came to me?" he asked. The wind was loud. He raised his voice just enough. "Maybe 4 minutes, she said. I looked at everyone. I asked the man at the counter. "Big man, young," I said, "please, my granddaughter's been taken." And he looked at me and said, "Call the police." Her voice had gone flat. Not bitter, just flat. 3 other people. I asked 3 other people. They all said, "Call the police." Like I hadn't already called. Like a phone call was the same as being there. "And then you came to me. You weren't looking away," she said. And he was quiet for a moment. "Most people were," she continued. "When I came through that door, most of them looked, and then they looked at their plates, or their phones, or the window. You know how people do. Something uncomfortable comes in, and they decide they didn't see it." She paused. "You were looking right at me. You didn't look away, even when I started toward you." Another silence. "Why me?" he asked. And she understood from the way he asked it that the question wasn't vanity. It was something else, something older. "Because you looked like someone who's made hard decisions," Margaret said. "And you didn't flinch when I came toward you. That's all I needed to know." Rex Gallagher was riding 6 bikes back and to the left of Colt, and he was doing 3 things at once: keeping formation, working his phone through his earpiece, and running the kind of mental calculations he'd learned in 8 years of military service, and 12 more years of life that had taken him everywhere a person could go and back. He'd known Colt Maddox for 19 of those years, ridden with him, bled with him once on a stretch of highway in Nevada that neither of them talked about anymore. He trusted him. What he trusted even more right now was the information coming in through his earpiece from Donna Reyes, who was in the front formation and happened to have spent a decade working dispatch for the county sheriff's office in Wyoming before she retired and joined their club. "Donna," he said, "what do you have?" "Property record for Pruitt family, Harlan County," Donna said. Her voice was crisp, professional, like she'd never stopped doing this, just changed the uniform. "1 structure, a barn converted partially to storage, no dwelling listed, last property tax paid 2 years ago. Before that, consistent with a man who pays minimally and on time. He cares about holding the property. He doesn't want to lose it." "Why does that matter?" "Because a man who cares about holding a property uses it," Donna said. "It's not random. It's a place that means something to him." Rex relayed that to Colt through their earpieces. Colt processed it silently then. "How old is the restraining order violation history?" Rex asked Donna. "First violation 2 years ago," Donna reported back. "He approached the mother at her workplace, spoke to Emily in the parking lot before security removed him. No charges filed. Mother didn't push it. A beat. The current restraining order was filed 8 months ago. Specific language about the child. No contact." "What happened 8 months ago?" Rex asked. Donna was quiet for a moment. "The mother remarried," she said. "It had been everyone on that earpiece channel. 5 people experienced people who had seen enough of the world to read a story from its outline, went quiet for a second. Because they understood now. This wasn't just about the child. This was about a man who decided that the world had moved on without him, that a door had closed, that the only way to push it back open was to grab the one thing that still connected him to what he'd lost. And that was the most dangerous kind of desperate. How far out? Colt asked. 22 minutes, Rex said. Maybe 18 if the dirt road after the county line is passable. It's passable, Margaret said from behind Colt. She'd been listening. Her voice was steady. I drove it last fall. It's passable. 18 minutes, Colt said into his earpiece. At the diner, Delamarche had called the county sheriff's dispatch 4 times. She'd reached a real person on the second call. She'd given them everything: gray pickup, Pruitt, property, child's name, description. Direction of travel, the name Colt Maddox. That last part gave the dispatcher a pause. Maddox, the dispatcher repeated. Is he involved in... He's helping, Della said flatly. He's helping. Do you understand the difference? Are you going to send someone, or am I wasting my time? She hung up. Then she stood at the window for a while, looking at the empty parking lot, the highway going north, the mountains that had been there before any of this happened and would be there long after. The cook, whose name was Paolo and who'd worked at Della's for 6 years and never said much, came to stand beside her. Think they'll find her? He asked. Della thought about the old woman's hands, the grip they'd had, the certainty in them, even when the rest of her was shaking. She thought about Colt Maddox's face when he'd put down his fork. Yeah, she said, I think they'll find her. 17 minutes in, they turned off the county road. The formation adjusted without instruction. Colt had seen this kind of coordinated movement before in context he didn't talk about, and watching 600 people do it behind him still settled something in his chest that didn't have a clean name. They slowed, not because they'd agreed to slow, not because anyone gave a signal, but because the kind of people who'd spent enough time doing things that mattered knew instinctively that the last mile wasn't about speed. It was about silence. One by one, engines dropped to idle. The roar became a murmur, became something just above quiet. They moved like that slowly, deliberately, 600 machines and the people on them down a dirt road that had seen nothing but deer tracks and neglect for years. Colt raised his hand. Fist. 600 engines died. And in the sudden, enormous silence, Margaret Carter heard it. A sound. Small, thin, trying so hard not to be what it was. The sound a child makes when they've been told not to cry and they're failing. Her hands, which had been gripping Colt's jacket for 18 minutes, stopped gripping. Because Emily was here. She was somewhere on this property, behind something held by someone who had no right to her, and she was here. Still making sound. Still fighting it. Colt heard it too. He turned to Rex, who had pulled up alongside. She's here, he said. Rex nodded once. And then Colt did something that Margaret would remember for the rest of her life. He turned just slightly and looked back at her, not to check on her, not to comfort her, to make sure she was steady. She met his eyes, she nodded, and Colt Maddox swung off his bike and started walking. Behind the barn. Fresh tire tracks in the dirt, still pressed, clear edges not yet crumbled. Not hours old, minutes. The gray pickup was there, passenger door hanging open like it had been opened fast, and the man doing it hadn't cared about closing it. Engine still warm. Colt rounded the barn corner with 3 others flanking him. Rex on one side, Donna on the other, and a quiet man named Vincent, who'd been in crisis negotiation before he was in anything else. He saw them immediately. Derek Pruitt, 46 years old, a man who'd looked harder by the decade, who wore his anger in the set of his jaw, and the way he stood like he was always braced for a fight he'd decided was coming. He had Emily's wrist in his hand. He was talking to her in that low, controlled voice that angry people use when they're trying to sound calm and fooling no one. Emily was not crying anymore. She'd gone past crying into something smaller, quieter, more private. Her eyes were on the ground. Her free hand was making a fist. Then Derek looked up and froze. Not because of Colt, though Colt alone might have done it. Not because of Rex or Donna or Vincent. Because of what was behind them. And stretching back along that dirt road, standing in absolute silence, was a line of people that seemed to have no end. Men and women, young and old, in leather and denim, on bikes they'd left idling at the edge of the property. some standing beside their bikes, some standing in the road, all of them facing forward. All of them watching. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Just presence. 600 people's worth of it. The kind of collective stillness that isn't passive, it's weight. It's atmosphere. It's the physical manifestation of consequence. Standing there in the morning light, saying nothing because nothing needed to be said. Derek Pruitt's hand tightened on Emily's wrist. Colt saw it. He took one step forward, slow, deliberate. "Derek," he said, "just the name, nothing else." Derek's eyes came back to him. Something moved in them. Calculation, panic, something else. Derek started. "Doesn't matter who I am," Colt said. He took another step. "What matters right now is one thing. Just one." Emily's eyes were up now. She was looking at Colt with the kind of focus a scared child has when they've identified the thing that might save them and are holding on to it with everything they've got. "Let her go," Colt said. Derek's jaw tightened. "She's my daughter. I have rights." "You have a restraining order," Colt said. His voice didn't rise, didn't harden. It stayed exactly where it had been, flat, clear. "You have a piece of paper that says you've already made decisions that took those rights away. And right now you have a choice." He stopped walking. He was close enough. "The choice is simple." Derek looked past him again, at the line of people, at the road full of witnesses, at the absence of anywhere to go and any version of this that ended well for him. His grip on Emily's wrist loosened. Emily felt it. She pulled, and her wrist came free. She stood there for exactly 1 second, one single second, in the open space between Derek Pruitt and Colt Maddox, between everything that had happened and everything that was going to happen next. Then she ran. Well, not toward Colt, not toward the road, toward the sound of footsteps she'd heard coming around the corner of the barn, just as Derek's grip had let go footsteps. She knew that she'd known since before she knew anything else. Her grandmother was already running to meet her. And they hit each other in the space between the barn and the line of motorcycles and the sound Margaret made, not a word, not a name, just a sound, the kind that doesn't have language because language wasn't built for it, went through every single person standing on that road like a current. Colt didn't look away from Derek, but he heard it. And something in the set of his shoulders, something nobody would have been able to name, but everyone could see, shifted. Just slightly, just enough. Rex stepped forward and took Derek's arm. And Derek, who had run out of choices and known it for the last 30 seconds, didn't resist. He just stood there with his jaw still set and his hands finally empty, staring at something that wasn't quite any of the people in front of him. Whatever it was somewhere behind all of them. In the distance barely came the sound of sirens. Late, like sirens always are. But this time it didn't matter. Rex Gallagher had been in enough situations in his life to know when something was finished and when something was just beginning. What had happened behind that barn, Derek's hand going loose, Emily running the sirens, coming in too late like they always did, that was finished. That chapter had a last page, and they'd turned it. What came next was something else entirely. Derek Pruitt didn't fight when Rex took his arm. That surprised Rex honestly. He'd expected resistance the way men like Derek usually gave resistance, not because they had a plan, but because resistance was the only language they had left when everything else was gone. But Derek just stood there, jaw-tight eyes somewhere else, and let himself be walked to the edge of the property like a man who'd already started processing the arithmetic of his own situation and didn't like the numbers. "You going to run?" Rex asked him quietly. Derek looked at him. "Where exactly would I go?" Rex glanced back at the road. 600 people, 600 witnesses. Some of them had phones out, not filming for social media, just documenting, the way you document something that's going to matter in a courtroom. "Good answer," Rex said. Even 2 sheriff's cruisers came down the dirt road, fast lights going, doing that thing law enforcement does when they're arriving after the fact and need to look like they were always in control of a situation that had resolved itself without them. The deputies got out quick, hands on belts, eyes moving over the crowd of bikers with that particular expression, half professional assessment, half genuine unease, that Rex had seen his whole adult life and had stopped taking personally somewhere around age 32. One of them, younger, said something into his radio that Rex couldn't catch. The other one, older, one with the kind of face that had been weathered by long Montana winters and longer nights on call, walked directly toward Rex and Derek and stopped. His name tag said Holt. "This the man?" Deputy Holt asked. "Derek Pruitt," Rex said. "Custodial violation, restraining order active. You'll want to check your system. There's a prior violation 2 years back. Wasn't charged. Should have been." Holt looked at Derek. Derek looked at the ground. "Where's the child?" Holt asked. Rex pointed. Holt turned and went still for a moment, and Rex understood why, because the sight of it was something you needed a second to absorb. Emily Carter, 8 years old, was standing 10 feet away with her face buried in her grandmother's shoulder. Both of Margaret's arms wrapped around her in that total consuming way that grandmothers hold children when they've been terrified of losing them, when the terror has passed and the relief is so enormous it almost hurts. Margaret was rocking slightly, not saying anything, just holding. Holt took off his hat. He put it back on. He turned back to Derek and said, "You want to tell me your version right now, or do you want to wait for your lawyer?" "Lawyer," Derek said. "Smart," Holt said, and he didn't sound like he meant it as a compliment. Moshe Colt had stepped back from the center of things the moment the deputies arrived. That was habit, not from guilt, not from anything complicated, just from long experience. Knowing that when law enforcement shows up, the best thing a man like him can do is make himself small and legible. Stand where he can be seen. Don't crowd the scene. Give the people with badges space to feel like they're in charge, because that's better for everyone. He was leaning against the side of the barn when Holt finished with Derek, and Holt's younger partner, name tag Selby, walked over to him. Selby was maybe 28, still had that freshness around the eyes that either burned off in a couple of years or hardened into something else. He looked at Colt with a mixture of expressions cycling too fast to fully read. "You Maddox?" Selby asked. "Yeah, you led all of this." He gestured vaguely at the road, the motorcycles, the 600 people still standing in the kind of patient, unhurried quiet that made Selby visibly more uncomfortable than any amount of chaos would have. "I drove north," Colt said. "People came with me." Selby looked at him for a second. "That's not much of an explanation." "It's what happened." Selby pulled out a notepad, uncapped his pen. "How did you determine this location?" "The grandmother gave us a direction. We had someone run the property records while we rode. Barn's the only structure on the Pruitt land up here. Wasn't complicated. And you just, what rolled up with 600 motorcycles." "We rode up," Colt said. "Then we stopped and waited." "Waited for what?" Colt looked at him steadily. For him to make the right choice. Selby stared at his notepad like he was deciding whether to write that down. He wrote it down. Then he said lower, "You realize how this looks. 600 people converging on a private property." "Is the little girl safe?" Colt asked. Selby stopped. "Is she safe?" Colt said again. Not aggressive, just asking. "Yes," Selby said. "Then we did our job." Colt straightened off the barn wall. "You do yours." He walked back toward the road. Donna Reyes was waiting for him. Arms crossed, that look on her face she got when she was doing 4 things internally and showing none of them. "Selby giving you trouble?" she asked. "Selby's 28 and writing in his notepad," Colt said. "He's fine." "Holt's the one I'd watch," Donna said quietly. "He's not hostile. He's curious. Curious is more complicated." She paused. "He's going to want a full accounting. Who was present, who made contact with Pruitt, chain of events. We need to make sure everything we say lines up, not because we did anything wrong, but because 600 bikers chase a man into the woods looks a certain way in a report, and we need it to look a different way." "It looks like exactly what it was," Colt said. I know that. You know that. A county prosecutor reads the incident report 3 months from now, doesn't know that. So we're careful." She met his eyes. "We're always careful." He nodded once. That was the compact between them. Had been for years. Donna handled the paperwork. Reality, Colt handled everything else. "How's the grandmother?" he asked. Donna's expression shifted, just slightly. "Go see for yourself." He found Margaret Carter sitting on the ground. Not because she'd fallen, not because something had happened. She'd just sat down, right there in the dirt beside a piece of fence that hadn't held anything in probably 10 years, with Emily pressed against her side and one arm still around the girl's shoulders, and she'd sat down because her legs had apparently finally consulted with the rest of her body and submitted their resignation. Emily was talking, low fast the way children talk when the fear is passing and the words that have been held in start coming out all at once. She was telling her grandmother something. Colt caught fragments. He said we were going for a drive, and I kept asking, and he kept saying just a little farther, and Margaret was listening with her whole body nodding, making sounds touching Emily's hair. Colt crouched down a few feet away, didn't intrude, just let her see him. Margaret looked up. For a moment, she just looked at him. Her eyes were red but dry. She hadn't cried, or if she had, it had been while he wasn't watching, and she'd gotten through it before he got here. There was something in her face that wasn't quite what he'd expected. He'd expected relief, and it was there, enormous, invisible. But there was something else underneath it. How did you know? She asked. Know what? That stopping was the right move. That coming in slow was the right move. That all of it. How did you know? He thought about it for a second. Real answer, not a quick one. Because he wasn't running, Colt said. If he was going to run, he'd have been gone before we got here. He was still on the property because he hadn't decided yet. Men who haven't decided yet, you don't push them. You give them time to arrive at the obvious conclusion on their own. Margaret looked at him for another moment. Where'd you learn that? Different place than this, he said. She accepted that without pushing it. Then she looked down at Emily, who had gone quiet, and was watching Colt with the enormous, unself-conscious directness that 8-year-olds have when they're deciding something. Hi, Emily said. Hey, Colt said. Are you a biker? Yeah. She considered him. Are you the boss of all of them? And he almost smiled. No such thing as the boss. We just ride together. Emily looked past him at the road where the line of motorcycles still stretched back farther than she could see. Her expression did something complicated, the way kids' faces do when they're processing something large and don't have the full vocabulary for it yet. There's so many of them, she said. Yeah, Colt said. Did they all come for me? He looked at her. 8 years old, hair messed up, dirt on her knees, a red mark on her wrist where someone had held it too tight. Asking the question with a kind of careful, uncertain hope, like she was afraid the answer would turn out to be something smaller than she needed it to be. Every single one, he said. Emily Carter looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she put her head back against her grandmother's shoulder. Dumbfounded, Margaret Carter reached out and put her hand briefly on Colt Maddox's arm, not grabbing this time, not desperate, just a touch, and said, Thank you. He nodded, stood up, walked back toward the road. Behind him, he didn't hear crying. He heard Emily ask her grandmother if they could get pancakes, and he heard Margaret laugh, a real one, sudden and short and completely involuntary, the kind of laugh that happens when the body needs to release something it's been holding and doesn't have another way to do it. He kept walking. Rex fell into step beside him. Donna's coordinating the statement process, Rex said. 12 people total interacted with Pruitt directly. She's walking them through what to say. Everything else, the people on the road, they're witnesses, not participants. Clean. Good. Holt wants to talk to you before we clear out. I know. Rex was quiet for a few steps. Then you doing all right? Colt looked at him. Why wouldn't I be? Because you always get this way after. Quiet. Goes somewhere. Rex said it without judgment, the way you say things about people you've known long enough to know their patterns. I'm fine, Colt said. Rex nodded. Okay. I'm fine, Colt said again, and Rex, who had known him long enough to know when to let it go, let it go. Deputy Holt was waiting by his cruiser. Derek Pruitt was in the back of Selby's car. The door closed, his profile visible through the window, jaw still set, staring at something that wasn't the seat back in front of him. Holt watched Colt approach with those curious eyes that Donna had flagged, and when Colt reached him, Holt offered his hand. Colt shook it. Walk me through it, Holt said. Just that. No preamble. So Colt did. Straight, clean, and order. The diner, Margaret at his table, what she told him, the direction, Donna running the property records, the decision to move, the formation riding north, the approach, the moment Derek's hand loosened. Holt listened without interrupting. He was good at that, the listening, the kind of cop who understood that what people say when they're not being interrupted is more useful than anything you can pull out of them with questions. And when Colt finished, Holt was quiet for a moment. You could have waited, Holt said. Could have kept the grandmother calm and waited for us. Yeah, Colt said, but you didn't. 40 minutes, Colt said. That's what she told me. 40 minutes for the nearest station. In 40 minutes, Pruitt could have driven her anywhere. Could have crossed a county line. Could have... He stopped. You know what could have happened in 40 minutes? You do this job. And Holt looked at him for a long moment. Yeah, he said. I know. So you understand the math? I understand the math. Holt glanced toward the cruiser where Derek sat. What I need to understand for the report is that at no point did anyone in your group make physical contact with the Pruitt before my deputies arrived. Rex took his arm after Emily was free. After. And prior to that, 600 people stood on a road and watched, Colt said. That's it. That's all we did. Holt looked at him. Something moved across his face. Not quite belief, something more like recognition. The kind of recognition that a person has when a story matches a reality they already understand, but weren't expecting to find here. Okay, Holt said. He closed his notepad. Off the record, he said. Colt waited. Holt looked away toward the road full of motorcycles, toward the hundreds of people standing in the morning that was now fully open and bright and utterly ordinary in the way that mornings have of continuing regardless. I've been doing this for 22 years, Holt said. I've seen this situation go wrong more ways than I can count. Man with a grievance, a child, a remote location, no law enforcement for 40-odd minutes. He paused. Outcomes aren't good. Statistically, historically, in my own personal experience, outcomes are not good. He looked back at Colt. So, he said, and that was all. Colt didn't answer, didn't need to. Hey, Holt put his hat back on. I'm going to need you to give your contact information to Deputy Selby before you leave. All of you the ones who had direct interaction. There'll be a hearing on Pruitt. Dates TBD, I'll want everyone available. They'll be available, Colt said. Good. Holt started toward his cruiser, stopped, half-turned. You riding back through Harlan Creek? Probably stop for fuel, Colt said. Whoa, Holt almost smiled, just almost. Della makes a good pie, he said, in case you're hungry. He got in his cruiser. The morning kept going. What happened next, the part that nobody had planned, that nobody had organized or choreographed or decided would be meaningful, was the moment that would outlast everything else in the memory of everyone who witnessed it. The bikers started their engines. Not all at once, this chair not with the wave effect of urgency that had carried them north. One by one, then two by two, the engines came to life with the steady, ordinary sound of people getting ready to go somewhere. Getting ready to go home, or back to the rally, or wherever the road took them next. Us and Emily Carter, who had been sitting with her grandmother, and who had been given a bottle of water by Donna Reyes, and who had eaten half a granola bar that someone in the crowd had produced from a saddlebag, heard the engine starting. She stood up. She walked to the edge of the road. She stood there, granola bar still in her hand, and watched the first bikes begin to move. The first rider saw her, a big man, gray-bearded tattoos climbing his neck. He slowed as he passed her, and he looked down at her from his bike, and he raised two fingers from the handlebar, not a wave, not exactly something quieter, and kept riding. The next rider did the same. Then the next. One by one, as the bikes filed past the 8-year-old girl, standing at the edge of that dirt road, they raised two fingers, quiet, small, the kind of gesture that doesn't need explanation. Emily raised her hand back. Not a wave, just her palm up, fingers open like she was holding something. By the time the middle of the formation reached her, she was standing straighter. By the time the back half passed, her chin was up. She wasn't crying, she wasn't scared. She was watching every single face go by, and every single face acknowledged her, and she acknowledged every single one back, and it went on for a long time, much longer than you'd expect, much longer than was efficient or necessary, because there were 600 of them, and they were all going to pass her before this was done. Well, Margaret Carter stood 10 feet behind her granddaughter and watched. She didn't try to stop it, didn't try to redirect or hurry, or do any of the things that adults do when children are experiencing something too large. She just stood there and watched her granddaughter receive something she didn't have a word for. Something that had to do with being seen, with being the reason 600 people had done something hard and right that morning, with understanding in some cellular 8-year-old way that the world contained people who showed up, even when they didn't have to, even when it was complicated, even when they looked like the last people anyone would expect. Colt was the last bike in the formation. He stopped when he reached Emily. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. The engine idled between them. "You going to be okay?" he asked. She thought about it, actually thought about it the way kids do when they decide to take a question seriously. "Yeah," she said, "I think so." "Good," he said. He started to pull forward. "Hey," Emily said. He stopped. "What's your name?" "Colt." She repeated it silently, like she was filing it somewhere. "I'm going to remember that," she said. He looked at her for one more moment. "Me too," he said. "Bye, Madam." He rode. The road took him back toward Harlan Creek, back toward the highway, back toward the world that existed before this morning, which was already different from the world that existed now, the way mornings always are after something real has happened in them. Behind him, Emily Carter stood until the last bike was gone and the sound had faded and there was nothing left but the morning and her grandmother's hand finding hers. "Come on, sweetheart," Margaret said softly. "Where are we going?" Emily asked. Margaret squeezed her hand. "Somewhere safe," she said. "We're going somewhere safe." They walked together toward the deputy's car, which would take them back to town, which would take them back to a life that had a crack in it, now the kind of crack that doesn't destroy a thing, but changes how light moves through it. Don and in Harlan Creek, Montana, at Della's roadside diner, a man named Jerry Halverson was still sitting at the window table. His coffee was fully cold. His wife Norma had stopped trying to get him to leave 20 minutes ago and had taken out her book instead because she knew that look, the look that meant he was working something out and wouldn't be done until he was done. He was watching the highway, watching for something to come back south on it, watching for proof that the thing he'd seen happen in this diner, the old woman and the tattooed man, and the silence of everyone else, himself included, had gone the way it needed to go. The first bikes appeared on the highway at 9:47 in the morning. They came in formation like they'd left moving south with the steady, unhurried authority of people who had finished what they came to do. The sound built and then washed over the diner and then faded south, and it went on for much longer than seemed possible, wave after wave of it. Jerry watched until the last bike was gone. Then he reached across the table and took Norma's hand. She put down her book. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," he said. He sounded surprised by it. "Yeah, everything's okay." She looked at him for a moment, then she looked at the window, then back at him. "You should have gone," she said. Not accusatory, just honest. The honesty of 38 years. "Yeah," Jerry said. "I should have." She squeezed his hand. "Next time," he nodded. But he knew in the way you know things after they've walked through you and out the other side, that next time wasn't a promise. Next time wasn't guaranteed. The only time you ever actually had was the one that was happening right now in front of you, asking something of you that you couldn't get back if you looked away. He knew that now. He'd learned it from a 71-year-old woman in a wrongly buttoned blouse who had looked past every safe choice in the room and reached for the only one that mattered. Outside, the highway was quiet. The morning went on. The story of what happened on that dirt road north of Harlan Creek didn't stay on that dirt road. No, it never does. That's the thing about moments that are real. They move. They find gaps in the ordinary and push through them, and before anyone has decided they matter, they already do. It started the way most things start now. Someone's phone, someone who'd been standing in that formation on the road who'd watched Emily Carter raise her open hand as 600 bikes filed past her, who'd filmed maybe 40 seconds of it without thinking too hard about why, posted it, tagged it with nothing more specific than a location and a sentence. "Little girl safe, Montana." That's all. By noon, it had been shared 11,000 times. By 3 in the afternoon, that number was closer to 90,000. By the time the sun went down on Harlan Creek, Montana, the video had been seen by people in 41 states and 17 countries, and the comment section had become the kind of place where strangers say things to each other that they'd never say out loud because something about the video had opened a door in them and they couldn't close it again. Colt Maddox didn't know any of that. He was in a motel outside of Great Falls Boots, off back against the headboard eating gas station food he hadn't tasted, watching whatever was on the television without seeing it. Rex had offered to get everyone together for a late dinner, the kind of post-ride decompression that the club usually did, loud and loose, and full of the specific relief that comes after something has gone right. Colt had said maybe later. Rex had looked at him and said, okay, in the way that meant he knew later meant no. The phone on the nightstand had been buzzing since around 2 in the afternoon. He'd answered 3 calls, let the rest go. The 3 he answered were Donna, who needed him to confirm some details for the written statement she was preparing. His older sister Janet, who'd seen something online and wanted to make sure he was okay, and who he'd reassured in under 4 minutes because she worried in the particular way that people worry about someone they've seen make hard choices their whole life and can't quite stop bracing for the one that doesn't come out right. And a number he didn't recognize that turned out to be a reporter from a paper in Billings who'd gotten his name somehow and wanted a comment, who he told politely and directly that he had no comment, and who he hung up on when she started her second question. He sat in the quiet after that and thought about the way Derek Pruitt's hand had loosened. In that moment, that specific moment, and he kept coming back to it, not because it was dramatic, it wasn't not up close, but because of what had been in Derek's face when it happened. Colt had been watching his face the whole time, the way you watch someone's face when you need to know which way they're going to go, and what he'd seen wasn't rage or surrender or fear. What he'd seen was something that looked from the inside of a bad decision that had run out of road like exhaustion. Derek Pruitt was a man who'd been angry for a very long time. And for just that moment, standing behind that barn with 600 silent witnesses stretching to the horizon, he'd run out of the energy that anger takes. That's what had released Emily's wrist. Not fear, not reason, exhaustion. Colt understood that in a way he didn't fully want to examine. He picked up the phone, scrolled past the missed calls to the one contact he'd been circling for an hour. Put the phone down, picked it up again. He called his daughter. 3 rings, 4. He was already preparing for voicemail when she picked up. Dad. Kayla's voice, 24 years old, with that particular quality, it had something between warmth and wariness, the ratio shifting depending on when they'd last talked. They hadn't talked in 6 weeks. Hey, he said. Hey. A pause. I saw something online. Was that? Yeah, he said. Are you okay? I'm fine. Another pause. The kind that has weight. Dad, she said. I'm not asking if you're physically okay. I can see you're physically okay. You're calling me so. He was quiet for a moment. I'm thinking about a lot of things, he said finally. Like what? Like how fast things happen, he said, and how they look different from the inside than they do from the outside. He stopped. Started again differently. There was a little girl today, 8 years old, and she asked me if all those people came for her, and I said yes, and she just accepted it like it was the most natural thing. Like, of course, 600 people would come. Kids are like that, Kayla said softly. I know. That's the part I can't get out of my head. He looked at the ceiling. When did we stop being like that? When does a person learn to be surprised that anyone shows up? Kayla didn't answer immediately. He hadn't expected her to. She was like him in that way she thought before she talked, which had made their arguments when she was a teenager both less frequent and more devastating than the kind that run on momentum. I think it's different for different people, she said finally. Some people get shown early that the world is smaller than they thought. Some people get shown later. A beat. Some people never get shown at all, and I don't know if that's better or worse. Which one are you? He asked. The question surprised her, he could tell. I'm still figuring that out, she said. Which one are you? He thought about Margaret Carter's hands on his sleeve. The grip of someone who'd been shown probably more than once that the world was unreliable, and who had chosen anyway to believe that this time would be different, that this one stranger would not be another disappointment. I think I got lucky, he said. Kayla was quiet for a long moment. Dad, she said, do you want to come for dinner? I don't mean right now, I mean this week, Saturday. I'm making the thing with the chicken, the one you like, and Marcus has been asking about you. Marcus was her son, his grandson, 14 months old, just learning to navigate the mechanics of walking, deeply committed to the project. Colt felt something shift in his chest. A small thing, the kind of shift that doesn't make a sound but changes the whole balance. Yeah, he said. Yeah, I'll be there Saturday. Okay, Kayla said. And in that one word was the entire history of the two of them. Everything that had been said wrong and everything that had been left unsaid and everything that still, despite all of it, remained. Okay, he said back. He hung up, lay back on the bed, closed his eyes. He was asleep in 4 minutes. In Harlan Creek, the night was doing what small-town nights do, settling in, going quiet the main street, emptying out by 9, the lights in the diner cutting off at 10 after Della finished the last of the cleanup. She stayed a little longer than usual, wiping down counters that were already clean, rearranging things that didn't need rearranging. Paulo, pulling on his jacket at the back door, watched her. You're doing the thing, he said. What thing? The thing where you clean something that's clean because you're not ready to go home and think. She put down the cloth, looked at him. When did you get so perceptive? I work with you 6 days a week, he said. You pick things up. She pulled a stool out from under the counter and sat on it, which she almost never did. Della did not sit during work hours as a matter of professional principle. I keep thinking about her, she said. The old woman, Margaret. Paulo leaned against the doorframe. What about her? How she looked when she came in, like she'd already been turned down everywhere else, and this was the last stop. Della shook her head. I watched her go past every single person in here. I watched people look away. And she stopped. You what? I had the phone in my hand, Della said. I was going to call the police. I was already dialing. And I watched her. I didn't say anything to her. Didn't ask if there was something I could do. I just watched. Paulo was quiet. I've been running this counter for 31 years, Della said. I've fed half this county. I know most of these people by their orders before they sit down. And this morning, a 71-year-old woman walked through my door in crisis, and I called the police and watched. She looked at her hands on the counter. I keep trying to figure out when that became enough. Paulo pushed off the door frame and walked over. He sat on the stool next to her, also against the professional code, but she didn't say anything. The things, he said, you called, you kept calling, that deputy told you to keep calling, and you didn't stop. That mattered. It wasn't enough. Maybe not. But you didn't stop. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't do anything at all. I stood at the grill and listened. When I heard the engine starting in the parking lot, I looked out the window. That was it. Della looked at him. I think about my son, Paulo said. He didn't say it often. His son, Mateo, 17, who'd had a bad stretch last year, who'd come out the other side of it, who Paulo had driven 3 hours to get. When the call came in, no questions, just driving. When I got that call, I didn't think about it. I just went. And I wonder, why is it that I can do that for my own without hesitation, and I can stand 6 feet away from someone else's emergency and do nothing? Because it's not the same, Della said. No, Paulo said, but maybe it should be a little more the same than it is. They sat with him for a while. Outside, a car went past on the main street. Then nothing. You know what I'm going to do tomorrow, Della said. What? I'm going to call Margaret Carter. I'm going to find out if she needs anything, food or I don't know, just something. She slid off the stool. It's not enough, but it's what I've got. Paulo nodded. He stood too. Tell her the pie's on the house, he said. If she comes in, tell her and the girl can come in any time. Della looked at him. When did you get so sentimental? I work with you 6 days a week, he said again, and this time he was smiling. And she was too, just barely just enough. She turned off the last light. They went home. The video, meanwhile, had developed its own life entirely separate from the people in it. By the following morning, a Tuesday that came in gray and unhurried over Harlan Creek, it had been seen by 4 million people. The number was climbing by the hour. News stations had picked it up, first local, then regional, then 3 national outlets running it in their morning segments with anchors saying things like heartwarming and remarkable, and the kind of story you need on a Tuesday morning. None of the anchors had the names right initially. They called Colt the biker, and Margaret the grandmother, and Emily the little girl, which was somehow both completely accurate and completely insufficient. A producer from a morning show in New York called the Harlan Creek Sheriff's Department looking for contact information. Deputy Selby, who took the call, said he was unable to provide that and hung up. Then he went and told Holt about it. Holt said, "How many of those calls today?" "That's the fourth," Selby said. Holt was quiet for a moment. He was reading something on his desk. He didn't look up. "There's going to be more," he said. "What do we tell them?" "Same thing," Holt said. "Every time. We can't provide contact information. We can confirm that a child was recovered safely, that an individual is in custody, and that the investigation is ongoing." He did look up then. "That's it. Nothing about the bikers. Nothing about the video." "They're going to get names anyway," Selby said. "It's already out there." "I know that," Holt said. I should. "But it's not going to come from us." He looked back at whatever he was reading. "Those people did a good thing. They don't need us handing their personal information to people with cameras and morning show segments." Selby stood there for a moment. "You really think it was a good thing, 600 bikers?" "A child is home," Holt said. He said it the way you say something that's both the end of the sentence and the end of the conversation. Selby went back to his desk. Holt put down what he was reading. It was the statement Donna Reyes had filed, clean and precise and exactly as useful as it needed to be, and no more borrowing. He'd read it 3 times. He'd been looking for anything that didn't line up any part of the sequence that put anyone in the formation in legal jeopardy, any gap in the story. And there was nothing. It was clean. 600 people had ridden north. 600 people had stopped on a road. 600 people had stood and watched. One man had spoken to Derek Pruitt. Pruitt had released the child. Law enforcement had arrived and taken custody of Pruitt. Clean, legal, airtight. He'd been doing this job long enough to recognize when something that looked complicated was actually simple, and when something that looked simple was actually complicated. This one looked complicated. 600 bikers, a kidnapping, a barn in the middle of nowhere, and was actually simple. Right thing happened. Nobody got hurt. The law caught up when it was supposed to. What was complicated was the part he kept coming back to, the part that had nothing to do with the report or the charges against Pruitt or the hearing that would come later. What was complicated was the moment he described to no one yet, because it was the kind of moment that doesn't fit into a report and doesn't translate well to language. He'd been walking back to his cruiser. After the statements, after Derek was in the car, after Emily and Margaret were sorted, he'd been walking back, and he'd passed close to where the formation was starting to break, up the bikes beginning to roll. And he'd seen a man mid-50s, built like someone who'd worked physically his whole life, gray at the temples. One arm that moved differently than the other, in a way that said old injury, standing next to his bike and crying. Not dramatically, not loudly, standing completely still, with tears running down his face, one hand on his bike, just standing there in the middle of everything. Holt had almost kept walking. He'd stopped. "Hey," he said, "you all right?" The man wiped his face with the back of his hand, not embarrassed, just practical. He looked at Holt. "Yeah," he said. "Sorry, it's just..." He stopped. "Take your time," Holt said. The man looked toward where Emily had been standing. She wasn't there anymore. He looked at that space anyway. "I've got a granddaughter," he said. "About that age, 8, 9. And when she came running..." He shook his head. Couldn't finish it. Holt stood with him for a moment. "You rode all the way up here for a child you didn't know," Holt said. The man looked at him. "You say it like it's unusual." "Most people wouldn't," Holt said. "I don't mean that critically. It's just true." The man was quiet for a second. "Most people haven't thought about it right," he said. "That's all. It's not that they wouldn't, it's that nobody asked them to. Nobody made it possible." He looked at the road. "Colt made it possible. That's what he does. He makes it possible." He'd gotten on his bike and ridden. Holt had stood there and watched him go and thought about it. Nobody made it possible. He'd been turning it over ever since the way you turn a thing over, when it's the shape of something you almost understand, but not quite. The call came in at 11:47 that morning. Selby took it first, then transferred it to Holt with a look that said, "This one is different." It was a woman named Linda Pruitt, Derek's sister. Holt put her on speaker alone in his office with the door closed. "I need to know what's happening with my brother," she said. Her voice was controlled in the way that people get controlled when they're managing something that would otherwise be unmanageable. "I know what he did. I'm not calling to defend it. I need to know what he's facing. That's a question for his attorney, Holt said. He doesn't have one yet. He called me not a lawyer. That's Derek. A pause. He told me about the bikers. Okay, Holt said. He said, and I need you to understand this is my brother's words, not mine. He said there were hundreds of them, and none of them touched him. None of them threatened him. They just stood there. That's consistent with what we found, Holt said carefully. He said the one who spoke to him, she stopped, cleared her throat. He said he told him to let her go, and that was all he said. Just that. Yes, another pause. My brother's been angry for a long time, Linda Pruitt said. He's made bad choices. This is the worst one, I know that. Emily's mother, Carrie, she did what she had to do, and Derek couldn't accept it, and I've been watching this build for 2 years and not knowing how to stop it. Her voice didn't break, but it came close to the edge. I keep thinking if something had happened to that little girl, if those people hadn't... She stopped again. Mrs. Pruitt, I just wanted to say, she said, to whoever I don't know who to say it to or how, but I wanted it said. Those people did something. Those people stopped something that I was afraid was coming and couldn't stop myself. A breath. Up. I don't know how you say thank you for that. Holt looked at the wall. I'll pass it along, he said quietly. He did that afternoon. He drove out to the motel where Donna Reyes was still handling logistics for the group coordinating who was leaving when making sure all the paperwork was filed correctly. She was in the parking lot on her phone when Holt pulled up, and she looked at him with that direct assessing gaze. She had the one that had probably been just as sharp behind a dispatcher's desk as it was now. He told her about Linda Pruitt's call. Donna listened without expression. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. You drove out here to tell us that, she said. It wasn't a question. I thought someone should hear it, Holt said. Donna looked at him. You're different than I expected, she said. What did you expect? Honestly, I expected someone to tell us to get out of the county and not come back. Holt almost smiled. You haven't given me a reason to do that. No, Donna said. We haven't. She looked across the parking lot. Most people don't see it that way. Most people look at 600 bikes and they see the thing they have already decided it is. I looked at a little girl standing on a road, Holt said, and I looked at what put her there safe. He shrugged. The arithmetic isn't complicated. Donna nodded slowly. There's one more thing, Holt said. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out a folded piece of paper, held it out. Donna took it, unfolded it. It was a handwritten note, 3 sentences, in the handwriting of someone who hadn't written by hand in a while, a little uncertain, pressing too hard. I know I'm not supposed to contact anyone involved. I know I don't have the right to ask anything. But if it's possible, please tell the man who spoke to me that I heard him. I heard him and it was the right thing to hear. No signature, but the name on the holding paperwork was Derek Pruitt, and they both knew it. Donna folded the note. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said, I'll give it to Colt. I figured, Holt said. He got back in his cruiser. He sat there for a moment before starting the engine. 22 years. He'd been doing this for 22 years, and he'd seen everything he thought there was to see, and he was still being surprised. That was either the best thing about this job or the hardest thing about this job. And on different days, it was one or the other, and today he genuinely could not tell which. He started the engine. He drove back to Harlan Creek. Donna stood in the parking lot with the folded note in her hand for a long time after his cruiser disappeared. And then she took out her phone and called Colt. He picked up on the second ring, which meant he'd been awake for a while and was sitting with his phone nearby, which she'd expected. You sitting down, she asked. I'm always sitting down, he said. Holt came by, she said. He had something for you. She read him the note. The line was silent. Colt, she said. I heard you, he said. You okay? The pause before he answered was the longest pause she'd gotten from him in 19 years of knowing him, and she'd gotten some long ones. Yeah, he said. I'm okay. Another pause. Donna, he said. Yeah. Saturday, I'm going to my daughter's for dinner. She blinked. In 19 years, she had never once heard him volunteer that kind of information about his personal life. She filed it away carefully. Good, she said, and she kept every single other thing she wanted to say completely out of her voice. Good, Han, he agreed. He hung up. She stood in the parking lot in the afternoon light, the folded note in her hand, and she thought about all the ways a single morning could move through a person, through hundreds of people, through a little girl who'd raised her open hand to 600 strangers and found 600 hands raised back. She thought about what the man with the gray temples had said to Holt. Colt makes it possible. She thought about what possible meant, what it cost, what it gave back. Then she put the note in her jacket pocket next to her heart, which was where she put things that needed to be kept. She went back inside. The afternoon kept going. In the way that afternoons do in Montana in May, with the light long and even, and the mountains still there, enormous and patient and utterly indifferent to the fact that something had changed in the people moving through the world beneath them. Something real, the kind that doesn't need noise to last. 4 million views became 8 million by Wednesday morning. 8 million became 23 million by Thursday noon. And somewhere in that climb, somewhere between the morning show segments and the newspaper articles and the radio hosts reading the story aloud to their drive-time audiences, the people in it stopped being abstract and started being findable. That was the internet's particular gift and its particular cruelty, and it arrived for Colt Maddox on Thursday afternoon in the form of a phone call from Rex that started with, "Don't go online." Nasu, Colt was on the road heading toward Kayla's place 2 days early because he'd woken up Wednesday morning and decided that Saturday felt too far away, and he was done waiting for things he wanted. He had his phone on the mount, the call on speaker, the highway doing what highways do. Why, he said, because there's a lot of it, and most of it is people being people, and you don't need that right now. Rex. There's a piece, Rex said. A long one. Some journalist out of Denver. She got to Harlan Creek. She talked to people in the diner. A pause, the Nebamham. She talked to the guy at the counter, the young one who told Margaret to call the police. Colt was quiet. He gave her the whole thing, Mupta, Rex said. His name, everything. He wanted to tell his side. What's his side? His side is that he panicked, that he regrets it, that he's been getting messages from people, strangers telling him he's a coward. Rex's voice went careful. It's getting bad for him, Colt. He's 26 years old, and people are finding his social media, and... What's his name? Colt asked. Rex paused. Tyler Braun. Is he still in Harlan Creek? The article says he lives there, works at the hardware store across from Della's. Colt thought about it for 3 seconds. Then get me Della's number. Rex gave it to him. Colt called Della. She picked up on the second ring with the energy of someone who'd been fielding calls for 3 days and had gotten very efficient at processing them. Della's. This is Colt Maddox, he said. The efficiency stopped. A beat of silence. Well, she said, then how are you? I'm fine, I need a favor. Name it. Tyler Braun, he said, the young man who was in the diner Monday. Another pause. Longer. I know who he is, Della said, and her voice had changed something protective moving into it and something tired underneath that. Is he okay? No, Della said plainly. He's not okay. He's 26 years old, and the internet has decided he's the villain of a story, and he didn't ask to be in. He came in yesterday for lunch, and he could barely hold his coffee cup. His hands were shaking. She paused. Kind of like someone else I saw in here Monday morning, actually. Except that person had somewhere to put it. Colt absorbed that. I need you to get a message to him, Colt said. Tell him I want to talk. No reporters, no cameras, nothing public. Just a conversation. Can you do that? Della was quiet for a moment. Why? Oh, why? She asked. Not suspicious, just asking. Because someone needs to, Colt said. And apparently that's going to be me. She got the message to Tyler Braun within the hour. Tyler called the number Della gave him at 4 in the afternoon. He sounded like someone who hadn't slept properly since Monday and had been practicing this phone call in his head without knowing who he'd be making it to. Mr. Maddox, he started. Colt said. Just Colt. Okay. A breath. Okay, I don't know what to say. I've been trying to figure out what to say, and I don't have anything that doesn't sound like an excuse. Then don't make excuses, Colt said. Just tell me what happened. Tyler was quiet for a moment. Then, she came up to me first, before she went to you. Did you know that? No, Colt said. She tapped on the counter. I was finishing my breakfast. She said, excuse me, I need help. Someone has my granddaughter. And I looked at her and I said, he stopped. I said, ma'am, you should call the police. And she said she already had. And I said, I'm sure they're on their way. And she looked at me for a second and then she walked away. Colt didn't say anything. I've been a hardware store clerk in this town for 4 years, Tyler said. I didn't know what I was supposed to do. I didn't know what I could do. It's not that I didn't care. I cared. His voice broke slightly. Recovered. I told myself someone else would handle it. I told myself that's what police are for. And then I watched a 71-year-old woman walk across that diner and grab you, and you stood up in about 30 seconds and 600 people moved, and I sat there with my eggs. Yeah, Colt said. And now people are calling me a coward on the internet, and the thing is, Tyler's voice dropped. The thing is, they're right. That's the part I can't get past. They're saying a thing that's true. I don't know how to argue with something that's true. Colt pulled off onto the shoulder of the highway. He sat with the engine running. Tyler, he said, yeah. You know what I did before I stood up? Tyler hesitated. No. I thought about it, Colt said. You know how long I thought about it? The time it took her to say one sentence. That's not heroism. That's a reaction. That's the difference between you and me on Monday morning, and it's not character. It's experience. I've been in situations where reaction was the only option for 20 years. That's not a virtue. That's conditioning. Silence on the line. I'm not telling you what happened was okay, Colt said. It wasn't. A woman needed help and you told her to wait. That's real and it happened and you're going to have to live with it. He paused. But there's a difference between living with something and being destroyed by it. One of those makes you better. The other one just makes you smaller. Tyler's breathing was audible on the line. What do I do? He asked, and he sounded so young, saying it not 26 younger the way people sound when the scaffolding they've been standing on turns out to be less solid than they thought. You figure out what you do differently, Colt said, and then you do it differently, every time, for the rest of your life. That's it. That's the whole answer. A long pause. Is that what you do? Tyler asked. Colt looked at the highway ahead, at the mountains beyond it, at the long, straight line of road between here and his daughter's house. Trying to, he said, every day. He heard Tyler exhale. Not relief exactly, something that relief could eventually become given enough time. Thank you, Tyler said quietly. Don't thank me, Colt said. Go do something. He hung up, pulled back onto the highway, drove. The news cycle, which had been building pressure all week, like a storm that couldn't decide where to land, finally found its shape on Friday morning. It found it in Carrie Ellison's kitchen. Carrie was Emily's mother, 29 years old. She'd been keeping quiet since Monday, deliberately quiet, because her lawyer had told her to, because the case against Derek was proceeding, and anything she said publicly could complicate things, because she was holding herself together with both hands and didn't have a spare one for cameras or reporters. Also, she'd held it together through Monday, through Tuesday, through Wednesday when her phone didn't stop and she turned it off and left it off, through Thursday when Emily had nightmares at 2 a.m, and Carrie held her and said, it's okay, it's over. You're safe, you're here until Emily went back to sleep, and Carrie sat on the edge of the bed in the dark and held herself in the specific way you hold yourself when you can't afford to fall apart. Friday morning, she held it together right up until the moment she opened her door and found Margaret standing there with a bag from Della's coffee and pastries and the slightly frantic energy of a woman who manages her feelings by feeding people. Carrie held it together for exactly as long as it took Margaret to look at her face and say quietly, oh, sweetheart. Then she didn't hold it together anymore. Once they sat in Carrie's kitchen for 2 hours. Margaret poured coffee that neither of them drank while it was hot and refilled it twice, and they talked the way women talk when they're past performance and into the real thing. Not in full sentences, not in order, jumping and circling back and leaving things half finished, because the other person already understood the other half. I should have seen it coming, Carrie said. This was the 23rd time she'd said some version of that sentence in the past 4 days to herself, to the stall of her bathroom at 2 a.m., and now to her grandmother, who was the only person she could say it to without it turning into a conversation about legal liability. You did see it coming, Margaret said, which was not what Carrie expected. You got the restraining order. You moved. You changed Emily's school. It wasn't enough. It was what you could do, Margaret said. You did what you could do all. And when you'd done everything you could, someone else did something. She put her hands around her coffee cup. That's how it's supposed to work. Nobody does it all alone. We're not meant to. Carrie looked at her. You went into that diner and you found 600 people on your own. I found one person, Margaret said. One, and then he found 599 more. She met Carrie's eyes. The first step is always just one person. You do one thing, that's all. Carrie was quiet for a moment. I want to meet him, she said. Colt, she stopped. Is that strange? Is that too much? Margaret shook her head. I'll make a call, she said. Plus, she made the call to Donna, who made the call to Rex, who texted Colt, who was pulling into his daughter's driveway in Great Falls when the message came in. He read it. Type back Monday work. Rex confirmed. He put his phone away. Kayla was already at the door, Marcus on her hip, and the kid looked at him with the enormous, guileless curiosity of a 14-month-old who had no framework for this person yet, but was prepared to develop one. Colt got out of his bike. He walked up to the door. He looked at his daughter, who looked like her mother in the angles of her face and like him in the expression she was holding, careful, warm, waiting to see how this went. You're early, she said. I know, he said. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry, I's made extra. She stepped back to let him in. Marcus extended one hand toward him from the safety of Kayla's hip, fingers spread, making the reaching gesture that babies make when they're deciding about someone. Colt offered his hand knuckle forward. Marcus grabbed his index finger with his whole fist, held on. Something in Colt's chest, that thing that had been moving all week, shifting and turning and working its way towards somewhere settled. Just settled. Hey, buddy, he said softly. Marcus made a sound of assessment and held on tighter. Kayla watched this. Her expression did something complicated and then resolved into something simple. Come inside, she said. Food's in an hour. He followed her in. 2 hours later, after the chicken that was everything she'd promised, in a conversation that was the longest unguarded one they'd had in 4 years about Marcus and her job, and the apartment she was thinking of moving to, and the trip she wanted to take, and what she remembered about being 8 years old, and what she hoped Marcus would remember about being 8, Kayla said the thing she'd been working toward for most of the evening. I watched the video, she said. I know. I watched it 7 times, she said. I kept starting it over. I kept watching that little girl put her hand up. She was looking at her coffee cup. I know that's not why you did it. I know you didn't do it for any of the things the internet is saying you did it for. What is the internet saying I did it for? Oh, everything. You're a hero. You're a symbol. She waved her hand. People are making you into whatever they needed that morning. The redemption story. The outsider proves himself. She stopped. Why did you do it? He thought about it. She grabbed my arm, he said, and she didn't look away. Kayla looked at him. Most people, when they look at me, they're waiting for me to be what they've already decided I am, he said. Good or bad, but they've already decided. She didn't look at me like that. She looked at me like I was just a person, the closest person, the right person for that one moment. He paused. You don't walk away from that. You can't. Kayla set down her coffee cup. I know I walked away from you, she said quietly. I know there were times when you were on the road and I was angry and Kayla, let me say it, she said. I need to say it. She looked at him. I was angry for a long time. About the road, about the club, about all of it. And I let that be bigger than it needed to be. And her voice didn't break. She was too much his daughter for that. I'm saying something different now. I'm saying I see it differently now. The kitchen was quiet. Marcus had been put to bed 20 minutes ago. You don't have to, he started. I know I don't have to, she said. That's why I want to. He sat with that. Let it land the way it needed to land, without deflecting, without rushing to fill the space with something smaller. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. They sat together in the kitchen for another hour, and they talked about smaller things, easier things, and it was the best hour he'd had in longer than he could precisely remember. When he left the next morning, Marcus was awake early and Kayla brought him to the door. The kid looked at Colt with the same frank assessment he'd started with the night before. Colt crouched down, eye level. "I'll be back," he told him, "sooner than last time." Marcus considered this information, and then with the sovereign confidence of a 14-month-old who has decided a thing, leaned forward and put his forehead against Colt's. The gesture meant nothing and everything. Colt stayed like that for 5 full seconds before he stood up. He looked at Kayla. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. He rode. Monday came in clear and cold, the kind of cold that mid-May in Montana sometimes delivers as a reminder that seasons are suggestions. Margaret drove Carrie and Emily to the diner. Colt was already there. He was at the same table in the back corner, same black coffee, and when the door opened and he saw them, he stood up. That surprised Carrie. She hadn't expected him to stand. She'd built on a version of this meeting in her head during the drive, what he'd look like, what he'd see, how she'd feel when she saw the person who had gotten to her daughter when she couldn't. The version in her head was important and ceremonial and slightly unreal. The reality was simpler. He stood up. She walked over. She said his name like a question, even though it wasn't one. He said hers the same way. Emily, who had been holding her mother's hand, looked at him. "Hi, Colt," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "Hey, Emily, I told my teacher about you," she said, and she looked it up. There was a video. "Yeah," he said, "I heard about that." "You're famous," she said with the frank, informational tone children use for facts they're just passing along, no judgment attached. He almost smiled. "No such thing," he said. "Sit down. I'll get you a hot chocolate." They sat. What happened in the next hour in that back corner booth of Della's roadside diner was not remarkable for what was said. Carrie thanked him and he accepted it without deflecting for once, and she could tell it cost him something to accept it. She told him what the week had been like, Emily's nightmares, the checking of locks, the way her daughter had started staying in rooms where she could see the door. She told him because she wanted him to know what he'd stepped into the middle of the full weight of it. He listened the way he'd listened to Margaret with his whole body without filling the pauses. Then he told her something that she hadn't known. He told her about Derek's note. He pulled it from his jacket pocket. Donna had given it to him. He'd been carrying it since and unfolded it on the table between them. He watched Carrie read it. He watched her jaw tighten and then release, tighten, and release. He watched something move across her face that was too complex to name. "He heard you," she said finally. "That's what he said." She looked at the note for a long moment. "I don't forgive him," she said. It wasn't hard when she said it. It was just clear. "I need you to know that. This doesn't make it okay. What he did to Emily, what he's done, the years of it." "I know," Colt said. "But," she said, and she stopped, and she looked at the note again. "But if something got through, if something actually got through to him," she folded the note carefully, pushed it back to him. "Then maybe it wasn't just Emily that got saved that day." Colt took the note. He thought about Derek's face when his hand had gone loose, the exhaustion he'd seen, the man who'd run out of road. "Maybe not," he said. Margaret had been sitting quietly through most of this, watching, contributing a word here and there, but mostly content to be in the room where the thing was happening, which was its own kind of participation. But now she said, "Can I ask you something?" Colt looked at her. "When you walked into this diner last Monday," Margaret said, "before any of this happened, what were you thinking about?" He looked at her. The question was so specific, so direct, so like her he'd known her less than 2 weeks, and already he understood that Margaret Carter didn't ask questions she didn't have a reason for. "I was thinking about nothing," he said. "I was just here, stopping for food." "You weren't thinking about anything important?" "No. No grand plan, no particular purpose?" "No," Margaret nodded slowly, like that was exactly what she'd expected. "That's what I thought," she said. "You just were there, and I walked in, and you were the one who didn't look away." She paused. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" "I think so." "You didn't have to be anything special," Margaret said. "You just had to be present. That's all it took." She looked at him steadily. "All of it. all 600 people, Emily, this table right now, all of it came from you being in a room and not looking away. That's the whole thread. The diner was doing its regular morning business around them. Coffee being poured, orders called out, the jukebox doing its limited rotation. Ordinary Tuesday life. Colt sat with what she'd said. That's a lot of weight to put on not looking away, he said. Yes, Margaret said simply. It is. Emily had been drawing on a paper napkin with a pen she'd found in her mother's bag, some 8-year-old project she'd been quietly absorbed in while the adults talked. Now she pushed the napkin across the table toward Colt. He looked at it. She'd drawn 600 small circles. They weren't all the same size. Some were barely more than dots. Some were wobbly, some overlapped. But there were a lot of them, more than seemed possible, on a single napkin, spreading out from one central larger circle in the middle. Inside the large circle in the middle, she'd written one word, Colt. He looked up at her. She was watching him with that unblinking, total focus. That's all of them, she said, the 600, and you in the middle. He looked at the drawing. I'm not in the middle, he said. Oh, she frowned. Yes, you are. You are the one in the middle. No, he said. He pointed to the large circle. You are. He moved his finger to the surrounding circles. We're the ones around you. Emily looked at the drawing, considered. She took the pen back. She crossed out his name in the center circle. She wrote Emily. Then she looked up at him with the expression of someone who has corrected an error and feels good about it. He took the napkin, he folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket, next to Derek's note, and 2 pieces of paper. Same pocket. Different weight, different meaning pressing against each other in the dark of the fabric, the before and the after. The break and the possibility of repair, the 8-year-old girl at the center of everything, and the man at the edge of it who had heard one sentence and not looked away. Carrie was watching him. What happens now, she asked, not to him specifically, more to the table, to the morning, to the ongoing fact of everything. Derek goes to trial, Colt said. That takes time. You take care of Emily. Margaret. He glanced at her. Keeps doing whatever it is you do that results in walking into diners and changing everything. Margaret made a sound, not quite a laugh, something dignified but adjacent to one. And you, Carrie asked. He looked at her. I go back on the road, he said. That's what I do. And the next time something like this, it won't be the same, he said. It's never the same, but yeah. He put his hands around his coffee cup. Same answer. Carrie nodded. She believed him. Not because he was trying to be believed, that was the thing. He wasn't performing. It wasn't selling anything. He said it the way people say things that are simply true, that don't require decoration. Della came by to refill coffee she hadn't asked to refill. She lingered just a second too long. Everything okay over here, she asked. She was asking the table but looking at Margaret. Margaret looked back at her. Everything's okay, she said. Everything's okay, Della. Della nodded, put the coffee pot down on the table for a moment, put her hand briefly on Margaret's shoulder, then picked the pot back up and went back to the counter. Emily watched this. Is that lady your friend? She asked her grandmother. Getting there, Margaret said. She makes good hot chocolate, Emily said. She does, Colt agreed. Emily looked at him. Colt, she said. Yeah. Will you come back sometime? Like not for a reason. Just come back and eat breakfast here. The question landed quietly, without pressure, without drama, the way 8-year-olds ask things when they haven't yet learned that some wants are supposed to be kept small. He looked at her. Yeah, he said. I'll come back. Promise. He thought about promises, what they cost, what they meant from him specifically. He'd made too few and broken too many, and he'd spent years deciding that the best policy was not to make them. He looked at Emily Carter, 8 years old, drawing 600 circles on a napkin, raising her open hand to strangers on a road. Promise, he said. She nodded once, satisfied, went back to her napkin. Only Colt looked out the window at the Harlan Highway, at the mountains, at the morning that kept going regardless, that had been going since before any of them and would keep going after. He thought about what Margaret had said, about presence, about not looking away, about how the whole thread came from something that simple. He thought about Tyler Braun in the hardware store across the street, carrying something he hadn't asked to carry, trying to figure out what to do with it. He thought about Holt in his cruiser 22 years of nights, still being surprised. He thought about the man with the gray temples, crying next to his bike, because a little girl had run and it had reminded him of everything he had to lose. He thought about Derek Pruitt in a holding cell, writing 3 sentences by hand and asking for them to be delivered to the man he'd faced on a dirt road, asking for acknowledgement that something had landed. He thought about Kayla's kitchen, Marcus's fist around his finger. He thought about 600 people standing in silence on a road, not because anyone told them to, not because there was a plan, but because the math was simple and the math was right, and they had all somehow done the same calculation and arrived at the same answer. He thought about one old woman with her buttons done wrong, running out of time and safe choices, walking past every comfortable option in a room and reaching for the one that scared her most. He picked up his coffee cup. He drank. He stayed at that table for another 40 minutes and nobody was in a hurry, and the morning light came through the window and moved across the table. The way light does, and the jukebox played its 3 songs on rotation, and Emily drew more napkin pictures, and Margaret and Carrie talked in the low, continuous way of people who have been through something together and are still in the process of understanding what it was. And Colt Maddox sat in the back corner of Della's roadside diner in Harlan Creek, Montana, and let himself be somewhere, not passing through, not stopping briefly, just somewhere, present, which it turned out was the whole thing, the whole thread. 6 weeks after that Monday morning, Derek Pruitt entered a plea. Not guilty by reason of emotional distress. That was what his court-appointed attorney had initially floated. Derek had rejected it. Carrie's lawyer called her at 7 in the morning to tell her, and Carrie sat on the edge of her bed in the early light and listened and said almost nothing. And when she hung up, she went to Emily's room and stood in the doorway and watched her daughter sleep. Emily was doing better. Not all the way better. There was no such thing as all the way. Not yet. Maybe not for a while, but better. The nightmares had reduced from every night to twice a week to sometimes. When she'd gone back to school, she'd rejoined her Tuesday art class. She'd drawn 17 more napkin pictures, most of which were now taped to the refrigerator. One of which, the one with 600 circles, was framed on her bedroom wall because Carrie had taken it from Colt's jacket pocket when he wasn't paying attention and had it done before anyone could argue about it. Colt had found out about the frame 2 weeks later during his second visit to Della's, which had become a thing not planned, not scheduled, just a thing that happened. He'd looked at the photo of it that Emily texted him. She had a phone now, a child's account closely monitored, one of the conditions of which was that she could text Colt because Carrie had decided this was non-negotiable, and he'd sat with his phone for a long time before typing back, "Looks good." Emily had sent back 6 heart emojis and a drawing of a motorcycle that was generously interpreted, recognizable as a motorcycle. He'd kept that too. On the plea Derek eventually entered was guilty, straight guilty, no conditions, no negotiations on the charge itself. Custodial interference with a restraining order violation. He took it and he signed it, and when his attorney asked him privately why he hadn't fought harder, Derek had said 3 words. "I was there." His attorney, who was 29 years old and still in the phase of his career where he believed every client should fight every charge, didn't fully understand that answer. Linda Pruitt understood it. And then she drove 4 hours to the courthouse the day of the sentencing. She sat in the back row. She didn't speak to anyone. She watched her brother stand in front of a judge and accept what he'd done, and she watched his face while he did it, and what she saw, there was not the face of the man she'd been watching for 2 years. The tightening jaw, the braced posture, the permanent readiness for a fight that existed entirely inside his own head. What she saw was something quieter, something that didn't have a clean name. As she thought about the note he'd written, she didn't know exactly what he'd said in it. He hadn't told her, and she hadn't asked, but she knew he'd written it, and she knew he'd asked for it to be delivered, and she knew that the asking itself was something she hadn't seen from him in years. The willingness to hand something to someone else, to say this matters enough to pass along. That was what presence did, she thought. What 600 people standing silent on a road had done. They hadn't fixed Derek Pruitt, nobody was claiming that, but they'd put something in front of him that was too large to argue with and too real to rationalize away. And in that moment, in the specific irreducible moment of Emily's wrist pulling free, something had shifted. Niece, you couldn't measure it. You couldn't put it in a report or a headline. But Linda had driven 4 hours because she believed it was real and she needed to see it in his face. She saw it. She drove home. Margaret Carter found out about the plea from Deputy Holt, who had taken to calling her once a week for reasons that had started as professional follow-up and had become something that neither of them had given a name to, but that Della found deeply satisfying when Margaret mentioned it over coffee. He just calls, Della said. To update me on the case, Margaret said. For 6 weeks. It's an ongoing situation. Della looked at her over the rim of her cup with the expression of a woman who has been watching people her whole life and knows what she's seeing. Margaret, she said. Don't, Margaret said. I'm not saying anything. You're saying everything with your face. Master Della put her cup down. All I'm saying is that it's nice, that's all. That someone checks in. She paused. After everything, someone checks in. Margaret was quiet for a moment. She looked at her coffee. She looked at the window. She looked at the table where Colt had sat that first Monday, which was just a table now ordinary in every way, holding nothing exceptional except the memory of what it had held. He's a good man, she said. Holt. Most people are, Della said. They just need the right moment to show it. Margaret looked at her. You've gotten philosophical. I've been philosophical for 31 years, Della said. Nobody asked me before. Margaret smiled. It was a real one, the kind that had been coming more easily in the last few weeks, as the fear slowly dissolved from the places it had settled in her body, as Emily got better, as the ordinary began to reassert itself over the extraordinary in the way that ordinary always eventually does. She was smiling when her phone rang. She looked at the screen. It was a number she didn't recognize. Area code she didn't know. She answered. Is this Margaret Carter? A woman's voice. Professional but warm underneath it. Who's asking? Margaret said. My name is Sandra Okafor. I'm a producer with... I know you've probably been getting a lot of calls, and I understand if you want to say no immediately, but I'd appreciate 60 seconds before you do. Margaret had said no to 11 media inquiries in 6 weeks. She'd gotten efficient at it. She'd gotten it down to under 30 seconds with most of them. She gave Sandra Okafor her 60 seconds. Sandra was not doing a morning show segment. She was not doing a viral moment follow-up piece. She was producing a documentary not about the bikers, not about the rescue, not about the video or the views or the internet reaction. About something she'd been working on for 2 years before that Monday morning in Montana had given it a shape it had been missing. About what exactly? Margaret asked. About what it actually takes to help someone, Sandra said. Not the dramatic version. Not the movie version. The real version where you're scared, where you don't know if it'll work, where the person you need might not look like who you expected, where you have to walk past your own fear to get to someone else's. She paused. I saw you go into that diner, Margaret. Someone filmed you from the parking lot. You didn't know you were already on the phone when you parked. You were running before you reached the door. And I watched you and I thought, that's it. That's the thing I've been trying to explain. Margaret sat with that for a moment. I'm not a story, she said. No, Sandra agreed immediately. You're a person. That's exactly the point. The second silence was longer. I'll need to talk to the others, Margaret said finally. Colt, Carrie, Emily's mother needs to agree, Emily, especially she's 8 years old and her mother decides. Of course, Sandra said. I wouldn't do this without everyone's agreement. Every single person involved. If anyone says no, the project doesn't happen. And you'd let us see it before it's finished. In writing, Sandra said, contractually. Another pause. Send me something, Margaret said, in writing. What you're proposing, what you'd need, what you'd do with it, then I'll decide. Thank you, Sandra said. Don't thank me yet, Margaret said. I haven't said yes. She hung up. She sat with the phone in her hand and thought about it. Della, who had heard half of this, was watching her from across the table. What was that? Della asked. I'm not sure yet, Margaret said. Something that might matter, or might not. She put the phone down. I need to call Colt. She called Colt. He was on the highway. He was always on the highway, or close to it, And he listened to her describe the call with a particular focused silence that meant he was taking it seriously without showing his hand yet. When she finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," she said. "That's why I'm calling." "What does Carrie say?" "I haven't called her yet, you first." He considered that, the fact that she'd called him first before Carrie before anyone else. He understood what it meant, not that he was in charge. More that she'd identified him from that first Monday as the person who's read on a situation she trusted. He still wasn't entirely sure what to do with that, but he was learning. "If it's real," he said carefully, "and if it's done the right way, it could matter. The right way meaning the story it tells is true, not the version people want, the true version." "The true version isn't clean," Margaret said. "No," he said, "it's not. The true version has Tyler Braun looking away," she said. "It has 14 people in a diner doing nothing. It has police arriving 40 minutes late. It has a man, she stopped. "It has a man who did something terrible and then wrote a note asking for someone to know he heard them." "Yeah," Colt said. "That's not a hero story," she said. "No," he said. "It's a human story. Those are different." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. "I'll read what she sends, then we'll all decide together." "Together," he confirmed. She almost said goodbye. Then, "Colt, are you coming back through Harlan Creek anytime soon?" "Already planning on it," he said. "Good," she said. "Della's been experimenting with her pie. She needs honest feedback, and she refuses to believe me when I tell her it's perfect." "I'll handle it," he said. She hung up smiling. Bombed 3 weeks after that phone call on a Saturday morning that was warmer than any they'd had, 5 people sat around the big table in the back of Della's diner and read Sandra Okafor's proposal together. Colt, Margaret, Carrie, Donna, and Rex, who'd driven back from Idaho specifically because Donna had asked him to, and because Rex Gallagher had never said no to Donna Reyes in 19 years. They read it in silence, all of it, every page. And when they finished, Della put coffee in front of everyone without being asked, which was her way of participating in things she hadn't been invited to but cared about. "Well," Rex said first. "It's good," Donna said. "It's genuinely good. She's not trying to make us into something we're not." "The section about Tyler," Carrie said. She tapped the page. "She wants to include him. His side of it." Everyone looked at her. "I think she should," Carrie said. "Quiet. He's part of it," Carrie continued. "If you tell the story without the people who looked away, you're telling the wrong story. You're saying it's easy. You're saying good people always know exactly what to do." She looked around the table. "Most of us don't. Most of us freeze. Most of us find the reasonable sounding excuse." She paused. "Tyler is why the story matters. If everybody already acted like Colt, there'd be nothing to talk about." Colt looked at her. She met his eyes. "You going to argue with that?" she asked. "No," he said. "They voted, all 5 in favor." Della, standing at the end of the table, having already read over Donna's shoulder for the last 20 minutes, said, "Good." Everyone looked at her. "What?" she said. "I'm part of this. She wants to film the diner." "My diner. I get a vote." Nobody argued. Sandra Okafor arrived in Harlan Creek 2 weeks later and spent the first 3 days doing nothing but listening. She sat in the diner. She drove the road north. She sat with Margaret in her kitchen and with Carrie in hers, and she met Emily, who assessed her with the frank, total focus she brought to everything, and after about 4 minutes announced that Sandra had nice shoes and could she ask a question. Sandra said, "Of course." Emily said, "Are you going to tell it right?" Sandra looked at her for a moment. "I'm going to try really hard to tell it right," she said, "and if I get it wrong, I want you to tell me." Emily considered this. "Okay," she said, "I will." She meant it, Sandra could tell. And she sat with Colt last. He was predictably the hardest. Not hostile, never hostile, just careful in a way that took time to get underneath. He answered her questions with precision, not deflection, but there was always the sense that he was giving her the accurate version, not the full one. That some part of him was held back, not from distrust, but from a lifetime of being careful about what he gave to the world and what he kept. They'd been talking for an hour and a half when Sandra asked the question she'd been building toward. "What do you think about it now?" "All of it, looking back." He took his time. I think about Margaret, he said. First thing, I think about what it cost her to walk through that door. She'd already been turned down. She already knew what she was walking into. And she came anyway, and she picked the scariest option in the room. He paused. Most people spend their whole lives being reasonable. Making sense. Picking the option that won't embarrass them or cost them anything. She wasn't reasonable. She was necessary. And that's a different thing. Sandra didn't write anything down. She just watched him. I think about the people who didn't move, he continued. Not with anger. I stopped being angry at that a long time ago. But I think about it because those people aren't bad. They're ordinary. And that's the problem. The thing that stops people isn't evil, it's ordinary. It's the comfortable distance, the reasonable excuse. He looked at his coffee cup. I think the world changes one moment at a time, one person deciding not to look away. And the thing that changes it is never convenient. It's never at a good time. It always costs something. He looked up at her. Emily asked me once if all those people came for her, he said. I told her yes, but the truth is more complicated than that. He was quiet for a second. They came because she mattered. And she mattered because a 71-year-old woman decided she mattered enough to be afraid for. And being afraid for someone enough to act, that's the most fundamental human thing there is. That's what we kept from wherever we came from. That's what's worth keeping. Sandra sat across from him in the back corner of Della's diner and let the quiet settle. That's the story, she said quietly. Yeah, he said, that's the story. The documentary came out 14 months later. Wish it was not a viral sensation. It didn't get 30 million views in a week. It didn't get picked up by a morning show or turned into a movie. It played at 3 film festivals. It won a small award at one of them. It was available online for free, which was Sandra's non-negotiable condition, because she'd decided from the beginning that the story belonged to everyone, and she wasn't going to put it behind a paywall. In the year following its release, Deputy Holt started a county-wide community response program, civilians trained to assist in emergency situations where law enforcement response time was too slow. He named it after nothing dramatic. Just called it the First Response Volunteer Network. It got funding, it grew. Tyler Braun joined it in the first month. He was, by the account of everyone who trained with him, the most committed volunteer in the program. He showed up early, he stayed late. He took every certification course available. He wasn't trying to erase Monday morning in Della's diner. He'd stopped trying to do that somewhere around the 4th month of carrying it. He was just doing the thing Colt had told him to do. Figuring out what he'd do differently and doing it differently. Every time. Rex Gallagher coordinated with 3 other riding clubs across Montana and Wyoming to set up an informal network, not an organization, not a nonprofit, nothing with a name or a website, just a channel, a way for people in trouble in remote areas to reach riders who might be closer than law enforcement. It moved information, it moved people. It saved in its first year 4 situations that might have gone differently. Nobody covered that story, that was fine. Donna Reyes went back to dispatch work, part-time for the same county she'd retired from. She sat behind a console again with a headset on and the precise, calm authority of someone who knew exactly what she was doing and why. When people called in crisis, she was the voice they heard first. She was very good at it. She had always been very good at it. Margaret Carter turned 72 in October in the back room of Della's diner, with Emily on one side and Carrie on the other, and Della's experimental pie, which had after 3 iterations and Colt's honest feedback, become genuinely perfect on the table in front of her. Colt was there. He'd driven 8 hours to be there, and he'd told no one until he walked in because he'd learned from Margaret that some things don't need to be announced. Some things just need to be done. And Emily sat next to him. She was 9 now, almost 10, losing the last of the early roundness in her face, growing into the person she was going to be. She leaned against his arm during the singing part of the evening, and he didn't move away, and she didn't look up, and neither of them said anything about it. After the cake, after Margaret had opened the small, carefully chosen things that people who love her had brought, Emily tugged his sleeve. Colt, she said. Yeah. Do you remember what you said, that you'd come back? Yeah. You kept coming back, she said. Like a lot. Yeah, he said. Why? He looked at her. 9 years old, growing into herself, asking the question with the directness she'd always had and would he suspected always keep. Because I said I would, he said. She considered that. Is that the whole reason? He thought about it. Honest answer. The full one, not just the accurate one. No, he said, and the other reason is that this is somewhere I want to be. Emily looked at him for a long moment with those eyes that missed nothing. Good, she said, because we want you here. She went back to her cake. Colt sat in the back corner of Della's diner in Harlan Creek, Montana, and looked at the people around the table, Margaret laughing at something Carrie had said, Della pretending not to be pleased about the pie compliments, Rex and Donna across from each other, talking the way people talk when they've been through things together and don't need to perform anything anymore. He looked at Emily, whose hand had found his arm again without her noticing. He thought about a morning, 600 engines, a dirt road, an old woman's grip. He thought about how it started with one person deciding to act, and how it ended if it had ended, if it was ending here, at this table, in this room, with these people who had been strangers and were not strangers anymore, who had been pulled together by one terrible morning and had chosen each of them to let that pull mean something lasting. He picked up his fork. He ate. He stayed. That was the whole story. Not the video, not the 30 million views, not the headlines that got the names wrong and the details approximately right and the meaning entirely wrong. Not the award the documentary won, or the network Rex built, or the program Holt started. The whole story was this one woman decided that one child was worth being afraid for. And because of that, only because of that, everything else became possible. That is what presence does. That is what it has always done, and that is what it will always take.